Good morning to all. So in our last class we discussed regarding the topic the classroom activity first, which is a passage from the Arundhati Roy's God of Small Things. So basically this test deals with the ideological foundations of the caste system, and also Arundhati Roy uses the caste hierarchy to comment on how power works in our society. So based on that we have two important questions that we should keep in mind. So the first one was regarding the discrimination against and the ostracism of the lower caste perpetrated in the social history of Kerala. So basically, Arundhati Roy in her novel illustrates the social injustice faced by the lower caste through the characterization of Velutha, who represents the Parava community, and descriptions of the discrimination faced by the Paravans. And these descriptions allow the reader to understand the power hierarchy between the upper class like Brahmins and the Syrian Christians and lower caste like the Paravans and the hegemony at play. So this means that we have to focus on the two important topics, the two important concepts in this test. So the first one is the power hierarchy, the power relations. Second one is regarding the hegemony which is used in this passage. So basically, through the recollections of Mamaji and narrator and the employment of terms untouchables, caste Hindus and caste Christians, author here acknowledges the caste system as omnipresent in the social history of Kerala across religions, and the literary text becomes a documentation of the hegemony exercised by the upper caste of both Hindus and the Christian religion. So basically in the classroom activity first, in the first question we had to focus on two important factors. The first one is regarding the power hierarchy, the power relations in the society. So basically the upper caste and lower caste, the discrimination from the upper caste to the lower caste. Second point is regarding the hegemony, in which the domination over the subordinate class. So these are some important topics that we should keep in mind in the regarding the first questions. And now we have the second question from this classroom activity, in which how does the author sensitize the readers to the social injustice committed against the Paravans. So the first one was regarding the discrimination against the lower caste, and second one is regarding the social injustice committed against the Paravans. So Arundhati Roy is here sensitize the reader about the caste system and how it was perpetrated across the communities. And also it signifies the image of untouchability by recounting their experiences, which includes how they had to sweep away their footprints off the road and abstain from clothing their upper bodies. By documenting their lived experiences, Roy makes the readers aware of the hegemony and the power hierarchy existed between the upper caste and Paravans, and thereby opens a space of critique of the caste system. So here we have to focus on the two important topics. The first one is regarding the caste system during that time. Second one is regarding the power hierarchy as well as the kind of hegemony implemented during that time. So basically this signifies the social injustice committed against the Paravans. So that's regarding two important questions from this passage, the classroom activity first. So we can see that how dominant class abuse the power to exercise their monopoly over less fortunate human beings or reinforcing the existing power relations. So here the dominant class means the upper class, and their monopoly over the less fortunate human beings means the kind of power over the Paravans by the upper caste in this test. So that's regarding the first classroom activity which is given in the textbook. And after that we have the second classroom activity. So in the first classroom activity we have the concept of this hegemony and the power relations. So now we have to focus on the second classroom activity in such a way that the literature may also reinforce the existing power relations. So now we have to focus on the Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Jane Eyre is an orphan girl living with her aunt, who is Mistress Reed, at Gateshead Hall, and Mistress Reed and her children treat Jane cruelly and look down on her as a dependent. Punishing her for a fight with her cousin that she didn't start, Mistress Reed locks her in a red room where Jane's uncle, who is Mr. Reed, had died years before. His ghostly presence terrifies Jane. Soon after, Mistress Reed sends Jane to the Lowood Institution, a charity school run by the hypocritical Mr. Brocklehurst. Lowood has terrible conditions and a harsh work ethic, though the compassionate supervisor, who is Maria Temple, intervenes sometimes to give the girls a break. At Lowood, Jane makes friends with another student who is Helen Burns, who helps Jane learn to endure the personal injustice and believe in a benevolent God. Helen, however, is sick with consumption and dies. When a typhus epidemic decimates the school student population, new management takes over and improves the Lowood's condition. Jane flourishes under her newly consolidated teachers and after 6 years becomes a teacher herself. Miss Temple marries and leaves Lowood, and the 18-year-old Jane advertises for a job as a private tutor, and she is hired to become the governess of the young Audley Warrens, and Audley is the ward of Mr. Rochester, the older, swarthy, and commanding master of Thornfield Hall. While in residence at Thornfield, Jane frequently hears the strange laughter and one night rescues Mr. Rochester from a fire in his bedroom. On another occasion, Jane helps Mr. Rochester secretly bandage and send away a man named Mr. Mansion who has slashed and bitten on the third floor of the mansion. And Rochester blames a quirky servant who is Grace Poole, but Jane is skeptical. And Mr. Rochester brings a party of English aristocrats to Thornfield, including the beautiful but calculating the Blanche Ingram. She aims to marry him, but Mr. Rochester turns Blanche away, and he is increasingly drawn to the plain but clever and direct Jane. Then Mr. Rochester soon asks Jane to marry him. Jane, who has gradually fallen in love with Rochester, accepts it, and Rochester hastily prepares the wedding. But during the small ceremony, a London lawyer intervenes and declares that Mr. Rochester already has a wife who is Bertha Mason from the West Indies. Her brother, who is Mr. Mason, appears to confirm this, and Mr. Rochester reluctantly admits to it and takes everyone to the third floor, where Bertha is revealed as a raving lunatic looked after by Grace Poole. And Rochester was tricked into the marriage, and he appeals to Jane to come away with him anyway, but Jane refuses to be his mistress. After a dream that wants her to flee temptation, Jane sneaks away from Thornfield at dawn. And penniless in a region of England she does not know, Jane experienced 3 bitter days of begging, sleeping outside, and nearly starving. Eventually, she comes upon and is taken in at Moor House, the home of Mary, Diana, and St. John Rivers. Then St. John gives Jane a position in teaching in a rural school. Jane discovers that an uncle that she has never met has died and left her £20,000. That uncle turns out to be related to the Rivers siblings, so Jane suddenly has cousins. In her joy at finding family, she divides her fortune equally between them. And St. John has plans to go to India as a missionary, and he proposes marriage to Jane, so she will accompany and work for him. Jane feels familial affection but no love for St. John. She says she would go as a St. John's sister, but he will accept no conditions. St. John's forceful personality almost convinces Jane to sacrifice herself and marry him. But in her confused emotional state, Jane experiences a telepathic flash. She hears the Rochester's voice calling to her. She immediately leaves to seek out Rochester. Jane finds Thornfield Hall destroyed from a fire that Bertha had set in Jane's old bedroom. During the blaze, Bertha had jumped from the roof and died. Rochester saved his servants but suffered injuries that left him blind and missing a hand. And Jane meets the humble Rochester at Ferdinand. And Jane meets Then Jane meets the humble Rochester at Ferdinand, his woodland retreat, and promises always to take care of him. They marry, bring back Audley from boarding school, and have a son. And Rochester eventually regains the sight in one eye. So this is regarding the novel which is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. And now we have to focus on the character who is Jane Eyre, and the development of Jane Eyre's character is central to the novel. From the beginning, sense of her self-worth and dignity, a commitment to justice and principle, a trust in God, and a passionate disposition. Her integrity is continually tested over the course of the novel, and Jane must learn to balance the frequently conflicting aspects of herself so as to find contentment. An orphan since early childhood, Jane feels exiled and ostracized at the beginning of the novel, and the cruel treatment she receives from her aunt, who is Henriette, and her cousins only exacerbates her feeling of alienation, and afraid that she will never find a true sense of home or community. Jane feels the need to belong somewhere, to find kin, for at least to kindred spirits. The despair tempers her equally intense need for autonomy and freedom. In her search for freedom, Jane also struggles with the question of what type of freedom she wants. While Rochester initially offers Jane a chance to liberate her passions, Jane comes to realize that such freedom could also mean the enslavement. By living as Rochester's mistress, she would be sacrificing her dignity and integrity for the sake of her feelings. St. John Rivers offers Jane another kind of freedom to act unreservedly on her principles. He opens to Jane the possibility of exercising her talents fully by working and living with him in India. Jane eventually realizes, though, that this freedom would also constitute a form of imprisonment because she would be forced to keep her true feelings and her true passions are always in check. And Charlotte Bronte may have created the character of Jane Eyre as a means of coming to terms with elements of her own life, and much evidence suggests that Bronte too struggled to find a balance between the love and freedom and to find others who understand her. At many points in the book, Jane voices the author's then radical opinions on religion, social class, and gender. So that's regarding the character who is Jane Eyre. Then, regarding the point of view of this novel, Jane Eyre is written in the first person point of view, with Jane serving as the narrator of the novel, and Jane narrates from 10 years later than the novel's end, meaning that she can both relate to her previous selves and comment upon them in hindsight. In parts of Jane Eyre, she describes events as she experienced them and occasionally slips into present tense. For example, directly after her escape from Thornfield, Jane describes, "The coach is a mile off by this time. I am alone." And the sudden switch to present tense creates a jarring impression which reflects the Jane's agonized mental state. The reader can also interpret this switch as Jane reliving traumatic events, emphasizing their lasting impact. She still remembers what she felt like after leaving Rochester. In other chapters, Jane makes the use of the distance she has from the events to address the reader, drawing attention to the fact that the time has passed. And Jane narrates with the benefit of hindsight. Throughout the novel, Jane has strong opinions that color the reader's opinions of events and other characters. And for example, when she describes the Blanche Ingram, Jane emphasizes the haughty pride in Blanche's expressions. Encouraging the reader's dislike, Blanche's eventual behavior justifies Jane's judgment, alerting the reader to Jane's point of view. So that's regarding the point of view of this novel, in which it is written in the first person point of view, and also Jane serving as the narrator of the novel. So that's regarding some important aspect regarding this novel, which is the Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. So, while focusing this novel in a very simple sense, this novel follows the story of Jane, a seemingly plain and simple girl, as she battles through the life struggles. And Jane has many obstacles in her life: her cruel and abusive aunt Reed, then the grim condition at Loud School, and her love for Rochester and Rochester's marriage to Bertha. So that's regarding a quick overview of this novel, which is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. So that's regarding the novel, which is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. So now we have to focus on the passage which is given in the textbook, page number 86 onwards. So this is the second classroom activity that we have to focus on, and after that we have to focus on some important questions from that. I saw he was going to marry her for family, perhaps political reasons, because her rank and connection suited him. I felt he had not given her his love, and that her qualification will ill adapted to win from him that treasure. This was the point. This was where the nerve was touched and teased. This was where the fever was sustained and fed. She could not charm him. If she had managed the victory at once, and he had yielded and sincerely laid his heart at her feet, I should have covered my face, turned to the wall, and have died to them. If Miss Ingram had been a good and a noble woman, endowed with force, fervor, kindness, sense, I should have had one vital struggle with two tigers, jealousy and despair. Then my heart torn out and devoured. I should have admired her, acknowledged her excellence, and been quiet for the rest of my days. And the more absolute her superiority, the deeper would have been my admiration, the more truly tranquil my quiescence. But as matters really stood, to watch Miss Ingram's efforts at fascinating Mr. Rochester, to witness their repeated failure, herself unconscious that they did fail, vainly fancying that each shaft launched hit the mark, and infatuately pluming herself on success. When her pride and self complacency repelled further and further what she wished to allure. To witness this was to be at once under the ceaseless excitation and ruthless restraint. Because when she failed, I saw how she might have succeeded. Arrows that continually glanced off from Mr. Rochester's breast and fell harmless at his feet might, I knew, if shot by a surer hand, have quivered keen in his proud heart, have called love into his stern eye, and softness into his sardonic face, or better still, without weapons, a silent conquest might have been won. Why can she not influence him more, when she is privileged to draw so near to him? I asked myself, surely she cannot truly like him, or not like him with true affection. If she did, she need not coin her smiles so lavishly, flash her glances so unremittingly, manufacture airs so elaborate, graces so multitudinous. It seems to me that she might, by merely sitting quietly at his side, saying little and looking less, get nigher his heart. I have seen in his face a far different expression from that which hardens it now, while she is so vivaciously accosting him. But then it came of itself. It was not elicited by meretricious arts and calculated maneuvers, and one had but to accept it, to answer what he has without the pretension, to address him when needful without grimace. And it increased and grew kinder and more genial and warmed one like a fostering sunbeam. How will she manage to please him when they are married? I did not think she will manage it, and yet it might be managed, and his wife might, I verily believe, be the very happiest woman the sun shines on. So now we have two important questions from this passage. So basically the first one is that reflect on the words in capitals, she could not charm him. Do you think this fact has more importance in a patriarchal society? So this is the first question that we have to focus on. So we can answer this question by focusing on the topic the patriarchal society. So basically the first point is that a patriarchal society is a male dominated society. Secondly, in such a society, women have no freedom to make the decisions of their own. And thirdly, all the power rests with men. In the given passage of the story, the lady in question tries her best to win the gentleman's love. So here, the Jane and the Rochester are the two important characters that we have to focus on. Then she tries to allure him in whatever way possible. And finally, but he is not interested. So, in a patriarchal society, the character of the man symbolically signifies that it is the powerful person in the society, which means a kind of dominant role in the society, whereas the woman has only the subsidiary role or the subordinate role. So, that's regarding the first question. So, basically, we have to answer this question by focusing on the major content, which is the patriarchal society. Then, secondly, how do certain assumptions about the assigned gender roles create an imbalance of power? And also, how do we swallow these assumptions unquestioningly? So, this is the second question that we have to focus on. So, this question is about the gender roles in which it creates an imbalance of power. So, basically, here also we have to focus on the patriarchal society in which women are supposed to obey men in all the respects, and women's freedom and identity are suppressed. And in this passage, it is clear that Mr. Rochester is not much interested to marry Miss Ingram, and all her efforts to allure him fail. And the man is going to marry her not because he likes her, not because he has any love for her, but for other reasons. And we don't know what these reasons are. And marriage is something that should be based on mutual love and respect. And also, a woman's duties are restricted to the looking after of the interest of the men in the family. So basically, we can answer this question based on this patriarchal society itself. And also, we have to focus on one more important topic under this question, in which, and also regarding how do we swallow these assumptions unquestioningly. The women are helpless in a male dominated society, and they have no freedom to question any injustice done against them. And if anyone questioned, it would be treated as a kind of disobedience, and it would be further weaken her position in the family. So basically, in the point of view of this novel, the woman swallows such prejudiced treatment patiently. So basically, this novel also signifies the sacrifice of woman for the patriarchal society. So this is about the second question that we have to focus on. So that's regarding the two important questions from this classroom activity. So today we analyzed the first classroom activity, and then we discussed regarding the classroom activity second. So in the next class we have one more classroom activity that we have to focus on, and after that we have the first chapter from this module, which is A Hanging by George Orwell. So that's for today. Thank you. Happy learning.